When the sun rose, so too did nations awake. Centuries of peace has led to this very moment. These nations will no longer be sleeping giants, rather beasts. Some may prevail and some may fall, but history will be changed forever. This is La Junta. On the 4th of February, nations began to make their moves. Vinoria, the kingdom to the west, would seize the island of Tinian, while Ikonomy made its claims for Marble Island and successfully invaded it. Surprisingly, on February 5th, an unexpected visitor returned. The Puma Federation immediately set up its territory in the eastern island and expanded south, making rapid moves towards the desert isles. Meanwhile, Ikonomy took over Hymar following another conflict. It was on this very day that a special entity was formed, one that would persist throughout the entire chapter. This was the dawn of Ocean, an alliance by Vinoria, Bartland, and Streland initially. Its aim was to be a defensive alliance. Later that same day, Puma and Vinoria made gains in Al-Salam Island. Puma took the west and Vinoria took the east. Just north of it, Vinoria established a dominion named Locust on an incredibly strategic island that contained many key military assets. Additionally, Streland managed to secure a deal with the Midway regional government over a strategic island which went on to become a military stronghold for Ocean. The next day, the Puma Federation took over Los Catina, continuing its slow expansion into the desert regions. However, back at Al-Salam, tension was beginning to brew between the locals and their colonizers. Just north, Ikonomy accepted a deal to become a Vinorian dominion and began its slow and eventual conquest of the other nearby islands over the next couple of days. Suddenly, the breaking point of tensions in Al-Salam arrived. Pumese authorities shot down a Phoenix Air 737 from Stralan in a fatal accident. Originally, authorities attempted to cover up the incident and even released false reports to the international and internal media. However, the truth was quickly found and sparked absolute outrage within Al-Salam. Locals armed themselves and just one day after, they began an island-wide rebellion against the Pumese. Puma immediately evacuated its assets without much fight, however. They still conducted air raids and bombings. In a marvelous show of luck, the Zahrani managed to shoot down an F-35 in a makeshift anti-air vehicle, which boosted its morale significantly. Many skirmishes and clashes later, the Pumese finally withdrew completely from Zahran territories, marking the first nation to ever have its locals declare independence. Puma and Vinoria evacuated all of their overlord residents, and the next day Vinoria gave eastern Zura. At this time, it seemed Ocean was an unstoppable force. They controlled much of the world at this point and had no signs of splitting up. However, one nation, despite having so much power and territory, sought expansion. Vinoria was already drawing up a plan. Vinoria wanted to use its dominions to help and possibly the Pumese, as the Zahrani rebellion was funded by Streland. The four nations, Ikonomy, Vinoria, Locust, and Puma, were preparing for an offensive. This was called Operation Devassus, named after the Vinorian legend on how their nation formed. On the 11th of February it came. The Vinorian and Ikonomy Air Force began to invade Ocean airspace, causing instant reaction from both Streland and Bartland. Puma was not present due to other ongoing issues with Zuran. Locust was on standby the whole time. As it turns out, Locust had plotted with Streland and Bartland, showing the plan in advance and even offering radar assistance to Vinoria's enemies. Eventually, after a long, brutal fight, White Peace was signed, and Vinoria was kicked out of the alliance and replaced with Locust. Just one day later, Locust declared its independence, and Vinoria was pressured into allowing them to be free. The scars of this conflict would remain for the rest of the chapter, and relations with Vinoria would almost never recover again. Locust, with Ocean's help, pressured the Puma Federation into giving Riznai over just after for supporting the Vinorian side. On the 12th of February, Airbutter Flight 3070 was shot down by a terrorist organization known as Tube, which possessed many arms and even sold some to nations. Despite having recently fought each other, Locust, Vinoria, Streland, Bartland, Ikonomy, and Zuran declared war on the organization. 2 days later, a 2 MiG-21 was intercepted by Locust forces, and just hours later a helicopter which was identified to have carried the organization's leader was shot down, ending the short reign of terror the organization had on the world. Assets were later seized by different nations. Despite having won the war, Stralin was still left shocked by the betrayal of Vynoria following the recent war. The first signs of tension began to build up when Stralin no longer recognized Tinian as being part of Vynoria on the 15th. It certainly didn't help that over the next 3 weeks, Vynorian and Stralin politicians were openly attacking each other on policies and mistakes they did, being constant critics of each other, and even throwing racial statements against their enemies. Halfway through the tension, Bartland and Vynoria agreed to partition the Republic of Ikonomy between their own respective territory on the 21st, which further fueled Stralin's view of Vynoria as an imperialist evil of Satan. Vynoria simply didn't care over expanding into Straland and wished to maintain its current status. It seemed that the tensions and relations only proceeded to disintegrate, and both sides refused to make a move. One day, Vynoria signed a treaty to hand Giandaran to Straland in hopes of ceasing the tensions, and even signed a treaty promising no war for a month. Straland ignored this treaty and proceeded to break it, declaring war just 1 day later. When war broke out, Stralin held a quick vote over who would join the war with them, and eventually Locust declared war on Vynoria too. Vynoria first fended off Locust fighters, but only barely succeeded, and eventually signed a white peace agreement with them. Eventually their attention drifted north towards the main threat. Stralin had a much superior air force in terms of training and equipment, however. Vynoria simply used their overwhelming numbers to shield itself. The next 9 days saw some of the longest and most brutal days of La Junta history, with Vynoria losing an extreme number of men against the Stralin advance in air superiority. Vynoria had called out numerous times to the international stage, pleading that Stralin was hinting at committing certain acts that cannot be named on YouTube. Despite this, the world turned a blind eye and never helped. Halfway through the conflict, a new nation emerged as Ikonomy's successor state, the new Republic of Phoenix. They first gained territory from Bartland before eventually managing to gain the other half from Vynoria. 2 days later, they managed to acquire Tinian through agreeing to never hurt the Vynorian ethnic population set there. Phoenix later joined Ocean, but was one of the few nations to maintain friendlier relations with Vynoria due to their past ties fighting on the same side. Just as the war peaked, as Vynorian deaths were double of Stralin's, they suddenly signed peace. Experts still debate on why, but it is likely due to Ocean forcing Stralin to stop the invasion due to how long it was taking. Where we now leave off is important. The events from this chapter will carry on to the next. Rivalries were cemented into the minds and individuals leading nations. This is not even the middle or the end, simply the starting ground and background of the whole story. Chapter 2.5 to 2.7 will be our next page in the book. I will see you all in the continued part 2. I'm totally not leaving it into 2 parts because Clipchamp can't run this much image or videos, trust me. Well, that's goodbye for now.